Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Lois Frankel, member of Congress here in South Florida. I'm honored to be joined today by my colleagues, Representatives Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Ted Deutch, along with our distinguished guest, Adam Lehman, the CEO and President of Hillel International, and Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. We're going to have an important discussion now. I know that everybody listening is aware of the rise of anti-Semitism. Hitler was right, went out between May 7th and May 14th. And we've seen so many instances of verbal harassment, physical attacks, vandalism. We're ready to have a good discussion today. And it's sort of sad and disingenuous that people are pretending that the criticism of Israel domestic policies is an excuse for an attack on Jews here and around the world. And plain and simple, I'm going to say this: as an American Jew, I'm incredibly proud of my heritage, and I will continue to stand against anti-Semitism in any form. I denounce it. It is unacceptable. However, the civil lining is now people are stepping up to stand against this hate. And that goes all the way up to the President of the United States standing up. So today we're going to discuss what this rise in anti-Semitism looks like. We have, as I said, great guests. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Congressman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you so much, Lois. And it's thunderstorming here, and I have a puppy, so you might hear her concern over that. But it really is my pleasure to join you and my friend Ted Deutch and the distinguished guests who are also our friends on this call today. I'm really thankful for your voices, and Lois, thank you for pulling us together and for the partnership that we have always had in our community, fighting anti-Semitism, hate crimes, ethnically and racially motivated extremism in our community and in our country and around the world. The dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents that we saw during and after the Israel-Hamas conflict really was nothing more than classic scapegoating of the Jewish people. And frankly, a lot of it was more of a convenient excuse to allow for white supremacists to capitalize on the situation. In many cases, you've had anti-Semites taking advantage of current events to weave in their deeper-seated bigoted beliefs and targeting Jews just for being Jews. And this hatred is especially prevalent on the wild west of the internet and on social media. It's really up to all of us to stand shoulder to shoulder and fight back against these tropes, as well as these expressions of violence and hate. When people are vilified and dehumanized, it's easier to treat them as less than human, and we cannot and must not be silent. We have to forcefully speak out, as we are doing here today, and constantly combat this hatred. In a global pandemic, we've had more people online and more affected by what they find there. So the urgency to act is even greater, and we must expose online anti-Semitism and racism that goes unaddressed on social media platforms, especially as purposeful disinformation continues to rise. This year, I think, demonstrated that social media companies simply cannot be relied upon to act fast enough or accurately enough to ban or block radicalized content. And we need legislation that holds large social media companies accountable for their algorithmic amplification of harmful radicalizing content that promotes offline opinion and activity. Certainly, there are First Amendment issues that need to be addressed, but we need a 21st century version of a law that allows for regulation when you have the online version of shouting fire in a crowded theater. The terrorism-fueled conflict in the Middle East has also had a ripple effect. Unfortunately, while safety remains a concern for so many in Israel, it's increasingly a concern we have here at home. In the past few weeks, we've seen a significant rise in anti-Semitic attacks and acts. Jews have been attacked on public streets, been spat upon, assaulted, and had our synagogues vandalized. There have been attacks on people and property in Los Angeles, New York, Montreal, London, and Miami. The uptick in my district alone is beyond disturbing. The so-called Goyim Defense League rallied outside the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center in Dania Beach. They chanted profanity-laced rhetoric. A Jewish family from New Jersey visiting Bal Harbor were targeted by 4 men who drove by and hurled anti-Semitic slurs and actual garbage at them. In Hallandale Beach, a man went into an anti-Semitic rant directed at a rabbi outside the Chabad in South Broward and then dumped a bag of human feces on the synagogue's doorstep. This must stop. I know I stand for free speech, as do my colleagues who are gathered today. And obviously, we have a traditional American right to assemble and protest the policies of our country or any other. But leaders throughout the country must clearly, firmly, and forcefully denounce and condemn the alarming rise in rampant hate, violence, and harassment targeting Jewish Americans. And we also have to allocate resources for legislation like the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act and the recently enacted Jabara Hayer No Hate Act. I'm a senior member of the Appropriations Committee. Lois is also on the committee with me, and I know I'm leading the effort to ensure that hate crime reporting programs, investigations, and prosecutions are adequately funded so that these perpetrators are apprehended and punished. And I look forward to hearing from everyone today and discussing how we can stand and work together to fight back against the scourges of anti-Semitism and racism that plague our communities. And again, Lois, thank you so much for your leadership on this.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to turn this over to our colleague, Ted Deutch.
Thanks, Lois and Debbie. Thanks to my South Florida colleagues. And thanks to Adam Lehman and Jonathan Greenblatt for joining this really important call at a time when the Jewish community, both here in South Florida and around the country, is really on edge. I don't want to take up a lot of time because Adam and Jonathan are truly on the front lines here and can provide, I think, really helpful insight into the severity of this problem in this moment. I just want to acknowledge their great work. Hillel is tracking a dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, both online attacks and physical assaults. Adam, if I may share, Hillel recently shared the experiences of a student named Noami, who said, quote, "There were 3 days in a row where I just woke up to hundreds of DMs and comments of people sending me pictures of Hitler quotes and Nazi symbols." Hillel is playing a valuable role as a safe space and resource for Jewish students, but their students are feeling increasingly unsafe on campus. And as the former chair of the University of Michigan Hillel Governing Board, I know firsthand the sanctuary and support that Hillel is providing, how that helps students live proudly Jewish lives. And so, Adam, I'm grateful that you're here. I also want to just acknowledge the incredible work of the Anti-Defamation League that tracks incidents of anti-Semitism, including online. For years, the ADL has developed crucial relationships with local and federal law enforcement agencies and shared the tracking of domestic extremist groups. It's been especially important in moments like these when hate group activity has spiked, and Jonathan and his team have recruited others to fight out the movement of hate, fight against the movement of hate against Jews and other minorities. So I'm grateful for all of ADL's work in communities across the country, as well as in Washington, where ADL has helped with legislation and efforts like our letter last week. I've spent the last few weeks speaking with American Jews in my district and around the country who are terrified. The rate of anti-Semitic incidents, the intensity of hate is making American Jews feel uncomfortable in the country that has long provided us shelter, protection, and comfort. And last week, as I said, with the help of my colleagues here and the support of organizations, including the ADL and AJC, Hadassah, Jewish Federations, and many others, I led a letter with nearly a third of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to President Biden asking him to take measures, additional measures to address the rise in anti-Semitism. We're asking the administration to use all available hate crime laws, including the No Hate Act that President Biden just signed into law last week, to protect our community, to go after the perpetrators of these horrific attacks. President Biden called these attacks despicable, unconscionable, un-American. Attorney General Garland announced a list of changes in the DOJ to focus greater attention on hate crimes, including improving state-level reporting. And as the co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, I look forward to working in Congress and with the administration to ensure that this continues to be a priority after the press conferences have stopped. And we also need the support of local officials, community and religious leaders, law enforcement officers. And we need everyone to stand with the Jewish community to do their part to reject anti-Semitism, because when we have anti-Semitism in the community, it means that there is a deeper problem that we have to tackle. So thanks to the reporters on the call for helping to shine a light on this dangerous situation. Thanks to the community members and leaders for speaking out and calling out anti-Semitism. And thanks especially to Representative Frankel and Representative Wasserman Schultz, my good friends, for helping to lead this effort. We have a lot more work to do, and I'm grateful to be able to do it with all of the folks on this call. Thanks, Lois.
Thank you, Representative Deutch. And now we're going to recognize our first guests. In fact, really, Ted, I thought I was going to give you the honor of the introduction, if you would like, of the president of Hillel International. Why don't I yield back to you? I know this is close to your heart.
It is, and as I just said, I know what Adam Lehman is and campuses are dealing with. I understand the important role that Hillel plays in providing an opportunity for kids to live fully Jewish lives, and however they do it on college campuses across the country. And frankly, I see it firsthand in the important work that Hillel of Broward and Palm Beach does in our own community. So with that, Adam, we're really grateful for your participation, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Deutch, and thanks to Representatives Deutch, Frankel, and Wasserman Schultz for elevating these issues. It's so critical that we do so, and for your leadership on them. Without it, I don't want to think where we would be. I'd love to be here as a calming voice to say, actually, the issues aren't so bad, but they really are. Anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish discrimination are real on campus in this moment, and the issues are growing. I want to offer a few concrete examples just to add to what has already been shared. At University of Vermont. Young women who are survivors of sexual assault were told through a series of social media posts that because they were Jewish and therefore supported Israel, they were no longer welcome as part of a sexual assault survivor group in repeated posts. In Florida, Nova Southeastern, pro-Israel students were specifically targeted with an Instagram post saying, if anyone is wondering who your local Zionists at NSU are, just look up Sharks at Israel on Instagram. And that targeting MO has risen up in many situations. We have had several Hillels that have been defaced either with flags burned or ripped from their flag posts in front of the Hillel, with windows broken, with vandalism of swastikas and other graffiti. In the heat of what have become just horrendously tense and vitriolic BDS fights on campus, which are very unusual for this time of year. Usually we are at the end of an academic semester, but in the wake of the conflict, we have seen a resurgence of BDS. We've had Hillel professionals defamed, accused of things I won't even repeat on the call, and threats of violence. That the only way to solve these issues is going to be, with violence. And at the University of New Mexico, in one of the worst examples, we had a Jewish student who, had the audacity to self-identify as Jewish through a shirt he was wearing, attacked by 6 people and physically assaulted and beaten. This is obviously beyond the pale of acceptability. It echoes, sadly, what we've heard, that this moment is different, that we do need to accept that reality and respond to it. If you move from the examples to the data, in May alone, we had 103 acute situations that we responded to as Hillel on campuses. And if you compare that to a year ago, it's 103 versus 4. So, for those who feel like, well, no, we've always seen these issues, this moment is truly different. As Hillel, as an organization designed to be there for the Jewish student community and really the broader campus community, we have responded aggressively. We are supporting student leaders. Really, our strongest voices on campus are those of students, and thankfully there are so many student leaders, Jewish students and other students, who have taken this opportunity to speak out against hate, speak out against anti-Semitism, and we'll continue to support those student leaders today and into the future. We're focused very much on educating administrators. Administrators at the university level need to speak out forcefully. They need to take action as they would in any other case of bias or hate. We've had multiple webinars, and we're also working individually with many administrations. And I am happy to say that we have had several administrations step up to the plate and actually speak out forcefully, but we need more. We have been providing safe spaces. This is a time when Jewish students who are facing the barrage of negativity, hostility, and even threats need that safe space and even mental health support. So we've been stepping in to provide that. And we've been coordinating with law enforcement. I think we all know that, even some of these situations which are just showing up as words can all too quickly and easily translate into threatening action. So we're working there as well. We still need help. We need administrators to address these issues of anti-Semitism with the same seriousness and the same intensity as they do other forms of discrimination and bias. And I think as a community, we can all be speaking out to administrators and calling on them to do their jobs in support of Jewish student communities, as they will, hopefully, the entire student community. We need public officials like the representatives here today to continue to be vocal in speaking out against this ugly rise of anti-Semitism. And I'm encouraged to hear about the legislative possibilities as well, because, of course, we need to protect free speech, but we also need to make sure that we're taking seriously the way that this hatred is rising up and growing in social media. I haven't shared data on that, but we know there are just countless examples of hostility and real threats. And it is poisoning the minds of so many young people, and it is creating untenable conditions for Jewish students and young Jews. And we need to continue to be able to access security resources. We're very grateful for the security grants via federal legislation that have been made available. We need more, because, again, none of us want to see further violence that gets acted out and is not that we're not in a position to protect ourselves against. And we need partners to stand with us. We've stood as a Jewish community, including Jewish student community, with so many partners facing bias, facing discrimination, facing racism. We need our partners to stand up with us. I'll close by saying I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, which is one of the epicenters of the cicadas this season. And, if you're out for a walk in Washington or Maryland, where I live, the sound of the cicadas, it's just overwhelming, and it's rising, as we go through the cicada season. And I said to my wife as we were walking last evening that, no, I can just tune it out. If you just don't pay attention, you tune it out. I worry that this growing anti-Semitism can fall on deaf ears, because people just tune it out. They say, oh yeah, right. More swastikas, more defacements, more, hostile. It's just part of the landscape. No, it can't be part of the landscape. It can't be part of the landscape on campus or elsewhere. We all have to hear it and respond to it. So thank you again for including me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Adam. And before we turn this over to Jonathan, I want everyone to know, if you have a question for our guests or any of the representatives, there's a little button you can click on at the bottom of your screen and just write in your question. And with that, welcome to Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. We're looking forward to your conversation. And first it requires unmuting or something.
How about now? Can you?
That's good. Perfect.
Great. So first of all, it is a pleasure to be here with three of my favorite members of Congress. I say that with no hesitation because all of Florida is lucky to have these three individuals representing you in the House, like not only on our issues we're going to talk about today, but on so many issues. They're phenomenal legislators. They're dedicated public servants, and they're always out in front. And I'm just really grateful for their leadership and the counsel I've gotten one-on-one from them over the years. So I'm just going to say thank you to the three of them. There's also a treat for me to be on the line with Adam. So I think, Adam Lehman has helped to re-energize and really drive Hillel. They're doing so much amazing work. And literally these Hillels, the professionals at these institutions go there to help kids do Havdalah services. And they find they have to learn hand-to-hand combat. And it is a hard, hard job. And I know, Adam, you just brought so much leadership to the field. And I'm just really glad to be in collaboration with you. So ADL, we describe ourselves as the oldest anti-hate organization in the world. We've been fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of bigotry for well over 100 years. I'm going to be very frank with you today on this Zoom. I'm going to not talk too much. We can leave time for questions. But the issues right now are incredibly, deeply serious. And this is hard because for many of us, this may take us out of our comfort zone. But the reality is we have seen a normalization of anti-Semitism in recent years, and it doesn't lend itself to sort of long-standing ways we might like to even think about our own politics or principles. It's certainly true that over the last 4 years, we saw a rise of anti-Semitism year after year after year, really driven, I think, in large part by sort of an extremism on the right. But the 75% spike we've seen in incidents around the country over just a 2-week period, the 200 plus acts of violence, vandalism, harassment, and I'm not even counting what Congressman Frankel talked about earlier, the online hate. I'll get to it. It's mind-bending. And the family that Congressman Wasserman Schultz talked about being harassed, and I would say assaulted in Bal Harbor. Or the Jewish people, and by the way, their non-Jewish allies who were physically assaulted in the neighborhood in Los Angeles, where I used to be, right after a convoy of cars drove through the neighborhood with megaphones shouting, "Free Palestine, Allahu Akbar," and other such things. And then people left those cars, went onto the sidewalk, said, "Are you Jewish? Who's Jewish?" And then assaulted those people. The man in Times Square, New York, whose crime was wearing a kippah, who was literally brutally beaten by a mob and hit with flagpoles. Those were not Trump 2024 flagpoles. None of the people committing these crimes were wearing MAGA hats. They were actually, many of them were wearing keffiyehs. Now, I deeply believe in allyship. The ADL has been at the forefront of this since my predecessors marched with Dr. King, stood with immigrants' rights advocates in the 1950s. And today I am proud to have been one of the original organizations that stood for the No Muslim Ban Coalition. I am proud to have been to the border to advocate for, children, unaccompanied minors who were locked in cages by the previous administration. I am proud to have helped to incubate over the last year the Asian American Foundation to support AAPI community. But let me be clear. You can have impassioned views about China and take umbrage with the way Beijing treats its Muslim minority, the Uyghurs, how they've handled democracy activists in Hong Kong, how they surveil their own citizenry. You can be impassioned and angry, and that is no excuse for assaulting elderly Asian Americans, for bullying Chinese kids on a playground, for putting up slanderous comments online. And you can be impassioned about the fighting in Yemen and the hundreds of thousands of people who've perished in Syria. I'm going to repeat that. Hundreds of thousands of people who've perished in Syria. And you can be angry at Bashar al-Assad for using chemical weapons and committing genocide against the Yazidi people. Him and the ISIS folks. And that is still no excuse for attacking Muslim Americans. And so you can feel impassioned about what's happening in the Middle East and have strong feelings about the 60 Palestinian children who were killed by Hamas rocket fire or by stray, IDF fire in the last few weeks. And yet that is no excuse for attacking, assaulting, harassing, victimizing American Jews. It is unambiguously unacceptable. And yet somehow I think it is true that our community has not gotten the same clear, unequivocal, without conditions, rejection of this hate that we've seen, again, vis-a-vis the Muslim community, the AAPI community. Why is that? Again, I come back to what I'll describe as the normalization of anti-Semitism. But when you make unhinged claims and conspiratorial accusations that, for example, the Jewish state is systematically slaughtering children or intentionally committing genocide, don't be surprised when unhinged people act on those conspiracies. We've seen it happen with QAnon. We've seen it happen against our own community. Think about Pittsburgh. Think about Poway. Think about Muncie. Think about Jersey City. And this is just the last couple of years. So the way that we push back on this is, number one, to clearly, without and courageously, without hesitation, to call out this hate and to demand of elected officials in Congress, as these three legislators have done, or other elected officials, speak out again without hesitation, say anti-Semitism is unacceptable, full stop. We can have a separate conversation about the need for a two-state solution. We can have a different conversation about how critical it is that Palestinians and Palestinian needs for dignity and equity are recognized, because I happen to believe that strongly. But I also believe that it is unconscionable that our synagogues, our JCCs, our Hillels are being vandalized, our students being harassed, our elders being targeted. It's some of the policy interventions we recommend, what we're expecting social media companies to do. And our center, ADL's center in Silicon Valley, is working with, and I can talk about how we took down hashtags, how we've tried to deal with Twitter, Facebook, and the other companies. But in a world in which our young people don't get their news from TV or even the Times, they get it from TikTok. There's no more Walter Cronkite. There's just Bella Hadid. And that creates conditions for us that are new and challenging. But I'll happy to respond to those in the Q&A, so there's ample time for conversation.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. What a great start, Jonathan. We have some questions. And whoever wants to field them, you just let me know.
All right, Congresswoman.
Oh, you're going to ask the questions?
Yeah, I'll
okay,
read them.
That's good. That's better. Okay.
All right. Our first question is from Michael. Michael says, thank you for your strong support and advocacy to denounce these horrific acts of anti-Semitism and hatred. Can you please discuss your efforts to provide funding for local security efforts?
Do you want me to take that?
We'll send that over to, I think, Debbie as our cardinal appropriator.
Sure. We collectively, both with the organized Jewish community as well as our colleagues on this call, have pressed successfully for increased funds for the nonprofit security grants, for the UASI grants, which are resources that are essential for us to make sure that houses of worship and other religious and vulnerable institutions that need those resources to be able to purchase both hardware and personnel assistance, security personnel assistance, to protect their membership and people who work in and attend these institutions. So we have dramatically increased the funding for both of those types of grants. Additionally, I'm proud to share with you that for the first time, we were able to get $5 million when no funding had been appropriated previously. The ADL and I worked together to be able to finally get the Matthew Shepard Anti-Hate Crimes Act funding appropriated. And now we're requesting $15 million in this fiscal year. We also, as a result of the anti-Asian hate COVID relief, COVID legislation sponsored by our colleague and dear friend Grace Meng, there's a grant program in that legislation as well, and we'll be seeking and pressing for funds to make sure that we can provide resources. Look, we have to make sure that we don't have a Swiss cheese approach to protecting people from the kind of uptick in bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred that they are experiencing, that you've heard described today from all of us. People should not be unable to go about their lives, exist within their faith, exist within their culture, and in living their everyday lives, be subjected to violence and hatred without the ability to be protected. And that's what those resources are for, that we will continue to fight for.
Thank you, Debbie. We have another question coming in. This is from, let's see who wrote this question. We don't have a name, but this really is a follow-up to a comment.
Morgan's job, huh?
Pardon?
You want to steal Morgan's job?
I'm stealing Morgan's job.
Okay.
I want to put a little twist on this, because I want to follow up to something Jonathan said about recognizing where the anti-Semitism is coming from. Quite often I'll get a text, I'm sure my colleagues do, or an email or a call from someone say, so-and-so said this, you've got to attack them. And my feeling has always been, I'm going to attack anti-Semitism, not necessarily the person, not to give them, somehow when you attack people who are saying terrible things, you help them raise a lot of money. It's a crazy world out there, but I would like to get your take on that, Jonathan.
So what you're saying is people say we need to attack or go after the people who are doing these things? People say, hey, why don't you, if we have a colleague that says something that may be anti-Semitic, right? Someone will get on the phone to me and says, you got to attack them back. Yeah. Well, look, it's challenging. I'll just say, I think there's this balance. Like on the one hand, like every news show I've done in the past week and a half, the first question is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Giving this woman any additional oxygen, is not good, I think, for America, let alone, for her. I mean, she's clearly somewhere between, depraved and deranged, right? I mean, she's somewhere in between the two. That being said, we do have to be willing to call it out. And I think it is important. It was meaningful when Kevin McCarthy called it out, because you needed a Republican to say she was problematic. And it's up to those folks who identify as Democrats to be willing to call out when someone on the Democratic or progressive side says it. Now, you can do that without vitriol. You can do that without hysteria. You can focus on facts. And so I think attacking is not the right mode. At ADL, we believe you've got to speak up. You've got to show strength, but you really have to share facts. Avoid the vitriol, avoid the hyperbole, and just ask people, hey, we would ask you to do the same thing here that you would do anywhere else. That's not always easy to do because, again, I think the three members of Congress in front of us, so many of us are in movements and in coalitions with people with whom we might not agree. But we have to be willing. If I'm not, we say, if I'm not for others, like, what am I? But if I'm not for myself, who am I? That's what Hillel wrote first. So it is critical that we stand for ourselves with conviction and courage, undaunted by what maybe the political vicissitudes of a moment. Not always easy to do, but I think very important.
Yeah, and Congresswoman Frankel, if I can add, because we see this playing out at university and student level where, we're talking about young people, and young people are in a developmental process and sometimes say things they regret or that really they could learn from, but we need accountability. And so when students are and they are saying things that are harassment or that are actual threats, there are codes of conduct. They need to be enforced. And, that becomes its own educational process. As Jonathan said, we don't need to overly, it can be clinical. It doesn't need to be dramatic, but there needs to be accountability.
Okay.
And I'll also just say, to build on what Adam said, you got to help explain to people why it's problematic. So when we say, Israel is systematically slaughtering children, that plays into a trope about Jews killing non-Jewish babies that's existed since the Middle Ages, right? And so when we say this is why it's a problem, when you say that, I think it's critical. Again, ADL has resources. You can find them at antisemitism.adl.org. So again, we focus on facts and root our resolve, right, in real information to explain how inflamed rhetoric creates real-world consequences, not in some abstract way, but making it, again, accessible and empirical whenever we can.
So you're saying correct the facts, don't necessarily attack the person.
Ad hominem is not a good approach. Empirical and fact-based, I think, is a much better strategy.
Okay. Back to
Lois. Can I just try?
Sure.
I just want to add to that, because it matters, as Jonathan points out. It matters when we have colleagues who talk about the state of Israel slaughtering children. It matters when we have colleagues whose position is Palestine from the river to the sea, which includes no place for a Jewish state. And when our colleagues talk like that and wrongly and falsely describe Israel as an apartheid state, there is a context for all of this, and they may or may not know it, but they need to understand the context, as Jonathan points out, is thousands, millennia, in which attacks like that against Jews have led to anti-Semitism and expulsion and violence around the world. And that's the moment we're in. So if you fast forward to right now, if your position is that there's no place for a Jewish state, and there are people in the United States who then hear that Israel is that the entire state of Israel is some unacceptable creation, ignoring the history. We don't have to have that conversation here. And all of this is the fault of the Jews. Then the anti-Semites take to the streets in New York and LA and Boca and Val Harbor, and we see what the result is. So of course it's not. Of course there is a connection, and of course we need to speak on. The last thing I'll say about this, to Jonathan's point, there is no one who would say that those awful attacks against the AAPI community that we all rightly condemned, there is no one who would say that those attacks are happening and we will condemn them independently, full stop, only when China stops the genocide against the Uyghurs, China stops violating human rights in Hong Kong, China stops considering the invasion of Taiwan. When all of that happens, then we will be able to say, I condemn AAPI hate, period. Well, there is likewise no reason that anyone should be able to say that there is some condition that needs to be met in Israel before we condemn anti-Semitism, full stop.
Thank you, Representative Deutch. Okay, Morgan, you got another question?
Yes, before I read the next question, just as a reminder, you can submit a question by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The next question is from an anonymous attendee who asks, what are you doing to address anti-Semitic hate speech that gets masked as pro-Palestinian speech by educators? How do non-Jewish educators learn the difference between criticism of Israel and modern anti-Semitism?
I'll happily jump in here. This is a major issue. And it really goes to what Jonathan and Ted were sharing, which is you end up with pro-Palestinian points of view, which again can be very legitimate if we talk about the need for dignity, the need for protecting human rights and the like. But that then translates into this false pedagogy, what really almost feels like its own big lie around a one-sided view of what is happening in the Middle East, and then conditionality around how that is translated to the Jewish community here. We need to educate at one level, and Hillel continues to invest heavily in educating, not only at a student level, but with administrators and with faculty. But I also think we have to be clear-eyed here in that there are people positioned as educators who are not educating, who are using their positions as educators to pursue their own holy war and campaign from a political point of view. And I think that requires counter speech and really, again, what is happening in this conversation and needs to happen beyond this conversation, which is leaders legislatively and in the community to just really be loud and clear around correcting, what are anti-Semitic tropes and making clear to audiences where those come from. And also making clear, as people have said, when a claim is unhinged and afactual, and so many unfortunately are coming from so-called educators, we need to just, be crisp. And I do wonder if I don't know if this is a federal government initiative, but if we can husband resources to make sure that in the ocean of social media, where, again, sometimes these educators, their statements are being propagated, that we have our own, broader campaign to, again, educationally be clear about what actually is happening in the Middle East, but also here, and at least have that out there as counter speech.
I can add a couple of points to that. As someone with 3 kids, and 2 kids now in college, one that just graduated, one that's about to start, and one that's in the middle. And Adam, I appreciate you highlighting that there are professors whose comments go viral. We're dealing with that at the University of Florida Law School right now, where you have a Palestinian professor of law who is promoting a very one-sided anti-Israel, Israel is an apartheid state point of view, not at all relevant to, she's certainly entitled to her opinion, but it's not at all relevant to her work at the university. It is certainly her First Amendment right to express it, but we do have to have some guidance and guidelines at universities, particularly with professors, so that we, not just in universities, but with organizations, with individuals, so that the differentiation between a pro-Palestinian point of view and a pro-Israel point of view isn't a zero-sum game. We are, at least I am, I know everyone on this call is both pro-Palestinian. I support a 2-state solution. I believe that the ultimate resolution to this is to have 2 states for 2 peoples living side by side in peace. We're certainly very far away from that possibility right now, but it's still something that I believe is essential. The from the river to the sea attraction, I think that we need education. There are the people propagating and promoting that concept. They very much understand what that means. But many students on campuses, Adam, definitely do not understand what that means. And if you ask them while they're promoting that notion, if they think that Israel as a Jewish and democratic state should cease to exist, many of them, I'm sure, would say no. And then if you pointed out, well, do you realize that advocating, from the river to the sea is exactly what that means? They would be appalled. We have to make sure that we are continuing to foster dialogue, and we have to make sure that occurs on college campuses. It is, I don't think, being done in a way that is really bringing groups of students who may not share the same point of view together in a constructive way, then things spiral out of control. Beyond college campuses, again, it should not be a zero-sum game. I don't believe that I am either pro-Israel and against anti-Semitism, or pro-Palestinian and anti-Muslim. I really think it's essential that we make sure that the social media propagation, the algorithmic propagation of hatred, needs regulation now. And Ted and I are privileged to be the co-chairs of an interparliamentary international task force against online anti-Semitism. And we are working with our parliamentary colleagues across the globe to, in each of our countries, come up with the best way to try to get at regulating these huge tech companies who are refusing to regulate this hate speech in a way that is going to short circuit it. I was talking to my daughter, I'll just end with this. I was talking to my daughter about this yesterday, and we were talking about how algorithms really control. She was saying to me, all the things that end up popping up on TikTok and Facebook and the videos that she's constantly seeing, that she can see are coming at her as a result of things she's previously clicked on. Well, like for me, that's a lot of things related to elephants, because I happen to like watching elephants. But for someone who has clicked on a lot of anti-Semitic content or anti-Muslim content, that's what these algorithmic processes end up showing them constantly, and it's all constantly reinforced. These big tech companies are no longer just platforms where you're tacking something up on a bulletin board, and whoever happens to walk by. They're promoting and propagating this stuff, and it has to stop. And they have to be told legally that they have to stop.
Okay, thank you for that, Debbie. Morgan, do we have another question?
Yes, we have 3 more. Our next
question. Okay, because I think we have a time stop on this Zoom, or are we free to go? Is everybody
go until tomorrow?
Okay, we'll go until tomorrow, because let's just make sure we get all these questions in.
All right, our next question is from Ellis. Ellis says, I'm a South Florida congressional district not represented by Reps Wasserman, Schultz, Frankel, or Deutch. What legislation or other actions should I be asking my congressmen and senators to support?
Okay, Ted, why don't you answer that question?
Well, thanks. There are, first of all, the most important thing that I think anyone can do with their elected official is to make sure that their elected official is speaking out against this alarming rise in anti-Semitism, and we can focus, and we should focus on Washington, but it also means working really closely with the local community and our local law enforcement, our local Jewish institutions, making sure that the connections are made to focus there. That said, in Washington, we ought to be, as my colleagues have pointed out and our guests have pointed out, we ought to be funding nonprofit security grants, increasing funding for those security grants. It's a really fraught moment. This is an important way that we can respond. That's number one. And then the other thing I would point out is we've been working with the White House to have a stronger federal response to anti-Semitism and all hate crime. And I think we all need to continue to work with the administration to ensure that happens. And then I would add one more, because we haven't really talked about it, but the history piece that Debbie talked about is critical here. And we passed the Never Again Education Act for Holocaust education. It's really important that we continue to make sure that those grants come and advocate for those grants coming to provide the kind of programming to help people understand that part of history, which is so often wrongly invoked and dangerously turned upside down by anti-Semites. Those are just a few ideas.
All right, thank you. Morgan? Morgan, I see some of the questions I see have a similar theme. You want to, maybe you could try to condense.
Well, we have one question from an anonymous attendee that says, it seems that oftentimes conversations like the one that we're having today happen with primarily Jewish audiences. How can we create informational events like this that are widely attended by non-Jews and highlight the fact that anti-Semitism is racism and attacks, whether verbal or physical, are hate crimes?
Jonathan, why don't you take that?
Sure, I'd like to. I appreciate it because, just last week, the organized Jewish community, Hillel was involved, ADL was involved, organized a national virtual rally called Act Against Anti-Semitism. Several members of, several of our congressional representatives participated in that, along with, Majority Leader Schumer, Minority Leader McConnell, Speaker Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, the White House, and a number of prominent non-Jewish leaders. So the head of the National Urban League, the head of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the head of the League of United Latin American Citizens, the head of the Committee of 100, a Chinese American organization, the head of the Asian American Foundation. There were imams on that Zoom. There was a Catholic cardinal, on that Zoom, an evangelical minister on that Zoom. So it was literally, there must have been 25,000 viewers, but they weren't all Jewish people. And I think it is fair to say, and I think, as Adam said before, so many of our young people are doing this allyship on the ground on campuses. So many of you on this Zoom have marched, have signed petitions, have participated, supporting, the equity and dignity of African Americans or immigrants, or even indeed Palestinians, right? And our Arab American and Muslim American brothers and sisters. We can't shy away from that work. But we also can't expect that it's quid pro quo. Oh, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. No, that's not why we do this. We do it because it's the right thing to do. I would encourage all of you to keep at that work. But as you do that, it is completely reasonable and entirely appropriate to ask of your partners and allies to show up for you as well. So that would be my take.
Lois, just really quickly, just to reassure that we are very much working together, not just in a silo with Jews talking to Jews. We have formed a Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish relations that allies the Congressional Black Caucus and the Jewish members together to focus on fighting racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism. We have a Latino Jewish caucus as well that has existed even longer than that. I happen to be a co-chair of both caucuses. ADL has brought us the idea of forming an Asian Jewish caucus, which we are in the works of pulling together right now. So making sure the allyship that Jonathan just mentioned is action oriented and actualized is something that we've been working on in Congress. And then just last week, and by the way, I'll just add that Ted Deutch was also on that national forum last week. So just he was at the end, but he was there. I saw him, and he did a great job. But last week in South Florida, all of our federations, AJC, ADL, NCJW, came together with our entire bipartisan South Florida delegation and did a forum on anti-Semitism and the importance of making sure we fight it together. And obviously all of our colleagues are not Jewish.
Thank you, Debbie. And let's see, Morgan, I think we're going to have to wrap this up.
We have one more question if you think that there is time.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's do it.
This is our last question that we have time for, and it is from Michael. He says, thank you for this wonderful webinar. How are we supposed to advise our children to identify themselves as Jews when doing so endangers their actual survival? Signing on for Hillel on campus could actually target them for their safety, and asking our preteeners to stand up at school is dangerous at this time. Please give us some strategies to keep them safe.
Adam, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I do. This is the nub of it. I mean, God forbid we are in a place where students feel like they can't self-identify because of fear. And so we need to do several things. I'll start where the last question ended. We do need to be in strong dialogue and partnership with other communities so they are speaking out in support, because that will create a sense of safety. We need actual safety, and that goes back to the earlier questions around security. Students should know that investments have been made so they are protected, whether they're identifying Jewishly or otherwise. We also, I don't want to overstate it, but I do think giving young people the air cover, so to speak, of messaging and communication that says you can be proud to be Jewish, you should feel proud, and you will be safe and taken care of. Some of it is so that they are seeing those messages from leaders like the representatives here today and others in the community to counterbalance what is making them feel unsafe, which is, messages of hate and threat. And I think between stronger communications, continued education, partnerships on campus, and frankly, investing in institutions like Hillel so there actually are safe spaces where they feel like as a Jewish student or young person, they will be taken care of and their concerns will be heard. We will get there. Trust me. I will fight every day to make sure that students don't feel like it is so unsafe. They cannot be Jewish, proud, and vocal about that.
Thank you, Adam. And
can I just say something, Lois?
Yes, go ahead, Jonathan, of course.
I would never tell a Muslim woman not to wear her hijab. I would never imagine telling, a Catholic or Christian person to feel uncomfortable wearing their cross. And we as Jews should never feel so uncomfortable. We have allies and support more than we know. And, as Adam mentioned, there's not only Hillel and that infrastructure on campus, there are plenty of other allies who we need to engage. But we should never tell our children, never tell ourselves, right, that we have to self-censor or hide who we are. We need to be proud, we need to be present, and we need to do so in a principled sort of way. One other quick thing, Lois, to the earlier question about what can you do to your members, we are pushing this administration. If you're sitting on this Zoom and you don't sit in one of the CDs of our members here, you should be reaching out, send a note to the White House, name a Jewish liaison in the Office of Public Engagement, fill the special envoy position for the Center for this Global Anti-Semitism State Department, and indeed build upon what I think it was Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz said, the nonprofit security grants, push DHS to expand that program. So our Hillels and our JCCs and our synagogues and our federation offices, have the protection that they need.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Lois?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. Sorry. I only because.
No, sorry.
All right. Listen, I just because I see you wrapping up, I want to say thanks. I also this is the moment we're in. I just want to acknowledge someone who's watching this texted me in response to an earlier conversation and said, I don't understand. You don't mean to compare Israel to China, do you? And so I want to use the opportunity to actually go back again and help make the point that it is those who turn the facts about Israel on their head, who then wrongly make wrong assertions, false, incorrect, dangerous assertions about Israel, and seem to be waiting for something to happen with respect to that faulty analysis before fully condemning anti-Semitism. I was making the point that China is a place where there are very real concerns and that are happening that should be addressed, that are factually correct, that no one would suggest should prevent us from condemning AIPI hate. I'm sorry that I have to try to explain that point, but it's important, and it's important as this conversation goes forward, because so much of what's being said, unfortunately, so many of the mischaracterizations, the lies about Israel are informing then the rhetoric and the dangerous activities that we're seeing that has been a big part of this conversation. Anyway, thanks, Lois, for doing this. Sorry to jump back in like that.
That is okay. Listen, this has been a terrific conversation. Adam and Jonathan, we thank you for joining us. Of course, Debbie and Ted, I'm going to see you soon. And listen, I think here's what we do all know is that silence is deadly. And so we are speaking out And I'm going to end by saying, I am a proud Jew. I denounce anti-Semitism and all forms of this bigoted hatred. And I thank all of you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.